Hey, good morning. It is just over 10 o'clock. It's 10:01. Good to see you. It's Wednesday, and it's time for our weekly webinar. It's July 17th. Now, I want to say this so I don't forget. Next week, I am on vacation, so there will be no webinar next week. But we'll see you the following week, whatever date that happens to fall on. Let's see. That is going to be the 31st. Geez, the end of July already. So good to see you all. Hello. I'm wondering. Give me some feedback. We switched in June to this new date, Wednesday, or not date but day. We used to do these on Tuesdays. Now it's Wednesday. So I'd love some feedback on how that's going for everybody. It's working well for me, so I hope it's working well for you. But good to see you. Say hello. Make sure that I know that you're out there and that you're hearing and seeing me okay. Everything looks okay, but I want to make sure everything's running okay. All right, so we're going to follow our normal format. We're going to have some Slott updates or updates from the Slott group. We're going to talk about some retirement distribution potential issues and some strategies. And then we're going to talk about the markets. And today's financial focus is going to be, now you're 2 years from retirement. What do you do now? What should you be doing now? So this follows a series that started a few weeks ago now. I started with, you're 55 years old, do this now. And I got a lot of great feedback. And as I was working through that webinar, it occurred to me that, there are stages leading up to retirement where there are things you should be focusing on. And many people do just find themselves there. But wouldn't it be better to plan and know what to focus on at different times? And it's really not about age, is it? It's because your retirement age might be 65. It might be 70. It might be 60. It might be 57. Who the heck knows? It's different for everybody. And that's why we talk about education on this channel and on these webinars and not specific advice, because it is different for everybody. So for this week, if you're 2 years from retirement, we're going to talk about what you should be doing now to work on that or prepare for that. And thanks. Hello, everybody. Hey, Jim. Denise, good to see you. David and Jerry. Oh, thanks for saying hi. Any of my team out there? If you're out there, say hello. I just want to reiterate the goals I have for you on these webinars, and that's to be inspired to make changes, to open your mind about different strategies and ideas and ways of thinking about planning and investments. Stay educated so you feel confident in these strategies. I was just thinking about a new client yesterday who we had their third financial planning meeting, which is typically our strategy meeting or our solutions meeting. And we come to a person with all these ideas and Roth conversions and different investment strategies, and we get into this account segmentation strategies, which all these things can be complex, and we understand that these are different ideas. I'm interviewing financial planners right now to join the firm, and we do things very, very differently than most people do, and that's a good thing. I'm proud of that, and our team is excellent at what they do, and so it's important for you to stay educated, to be able to just remind yourself and be updated so you can make changes along the way, but also just remind yourself, why you're doing these things that the majority of folks aren't. You read a book or you watch a video, you get inspired, but you have to stay on top of it and make changes. Good morning, Doug. So that's really the objective of these videos and these webinars. And it's great. It's really fun to see the YouTube channel grow. And I there's always my good stable of folks who are always here live every week, and that's a lot of fun because I feel like I get to talk to you one-on-one. And some of these conversations, go a little longer because I feel like it's a one-on-one conversation with you. But it's important. The communication is important. If you're clients like some of you are, and certainly folks who are just looking for education. And we've expanded a little bit. So we now have the podcast launched. So the podcast is called Not a Guru. That's really important because I talk about education, and I've talked about the importance of not taking advice from someone on YouTube or in a podcast, including me. Don't take advice from this. Take education from this. Be inspired to make changes. Be inspired to seek out the right answers. Be inspired to find your good retirement team. We're going to talk about that during the financial focus today. Someone who can work with you directly to really answer the questions and give you the guidance and give you the advice that you need, but it's not somebody on YouTube. I love it when people find us on YouTube and they become clients of ours and we can do that individual work, but there's not a person out there that should take anything that I say for anything other than education, in addition to whatever anybody else says. Speaking of podcasts, I'm going to be a guest again on David McKnight's podcast today. So at 1 o'clock, I'll be sitting in this room on the other side of the camera with David McKnight on his podcast. So that's recorded. He doesn't do it live like we do here, but that'll be recorded and then launched on Dave's podcast probably in a month or so. That is the Power Zero podcast. If you haven't already followed that, you should go to your wherever you can listen to a podcast, just like the Not a Guru. Go to wherever you can listen to your podcast. I use Spotify, but go there and please follow it, and you'll be able to hear these webinars, in podcast format. But today, like I said, in addition to sitting here today talking to you folks, I'm going to be here again talking to Dave McKnight for about an hour. And he usually divides those up into 3 or 4, maybe 5 segments in his podcast. So keep your eye out on that, and I'll let you know when they hit and maybe even share it with you. Okay, let's get into our slot report here. So I'm going to share my screen. All right, and the first this is the slot report mailbag. I'm laughing, and I'm going to share with you why I'm laughing. But Andy Ives did this response to the mailbag this week, and there's a question on here that is just very quick and abrupt. But the first one talks about required minimum distributions for a non-spouse beneficiary. So the question is, do required minimum distributions, that's RMDs, need to be taken when a non-spouse beneficiary inherits a Roth IRA? It seems that this has been a point of confusion for some time. Now, let me say, I'm reading this if you're just joining us. Well, first of all, if you're just joining us for the first time, please hit the like, subscribe, and notification button so that you always receive the videos directly. And as soon as a new video is posted, you'll be notified. But I'm sharing my screen with these slot reports and these the mailbag because the information is really important. So I don't expect you to be expert, but what's great about hearing these things week after week is that it triggers things in your mind. You might inherit a Roth IRA, and if you're a eligible designated beneficiary or a spouse, there are different strategies or different ways that you can handle that inherited Roth IRA or traditional IRA. So again, I don't expect you to be expert, but it may help you know what questions to ask. So let me start with the question again. Do required minimum distributions, that's RMDs, need to be taken when a non-spouse beneficiary inherits a Roth IRA? It seems this has been a point of contention for some time. And here's the answer. Andy writes, this is something that confuses a lot of people, and understandably so. The answer is, it depends on who the beneficiary is. Roth IRA owners are always deemed to have died before the required beginning date, regardless of age, because Roth IRAs have no lifetime RMDs, no required minimum distributions. As such, annual RMDs do not apply during the 10-year payout rule when a Roth IRA is inherited by a non-eligible designated beneficiary. This allows the inherited Roth IRA to continue to accumulate tax-free for the full 10-year term before the account must be emptied. Confusion centers around the rules when an eligible designated beneficiary, and I'm going to share with you who they are in a moment. So confusion centers around the rules when an eligible designated beneficiary inherits a Roth IRA. Eligible designated beneficiaries are permitted to use their own single life expectancy to leverage the full lifetime stretch on an inherited IRA. Remember, this used to be commonplace before the Secure Act, I think it was, shot that down, or maybe before the tax code changed that eliminated or stretch IRAs. But there are some folks who can still do that IRA stretch when they inherit it, and eligible designated beneficiaries are those folks. So I'm at while there are no RMDs on an inherited Roth IRA within the 10-year period, there are RMDs on an inherited Roth IRA if an eligible designated beneficiary elects the lifetime stretch. While an eligible designated beneficiary can avoid the 10-year rule and stretch an inherited Roth IRA over his or her own single life expectancy, the trade-off is that RMDs, even if non-taxable, must be taken annually by the eligible designated beneficiary starting in the year after the year of death. So this is an example where it may make sense to just wait until that 10-year payout rule, right? And just take one lump sum distribution at the end of that 10 years as a Roth, or take that lifetime stretch. So it depends on your age. It depends on your circumstances. So the question, can I do a qualified charitable distribution, QCD, to a donor-advised fund? No, QCDs are not permitted to a donor-advised fund. So I like that direct answer, Andy. Now, this is from Ian Berger. This is very interesting, this hypothetical RMD rule. And it's a lot of people try to get tricky or try to get cute with tax code and distribution strategies. We hear about people saying, well, geez, if I just if I do this maneuver, then I won't have that, and I think I can game the system here, and it's pretty hard to game the system. But here's an example. So the IRS hypothetical RMD rule prevents surviving spouses from avoiding RMDs. One of the more interesting rules, if any could be called interesting, from the 2022 IRS proposed regulations requires spouse beneficiaries in some situations to take RMDs. That's required minimum distributions before doing a spousal rollover. The IRS calls these RMDs catch-up or hypothetical RMDs. At first, it was hard to figure out where the IRS was going with this special rule, but after some analyses, it's clear that the IRS was trying to close a loophole that spouse beneficiaries could use in very limited situations to avoid RMDs. Let me pause there and say this is another example of the power, really, of this group of analysts in the Ed Slott Elite Advisor Group. And these are the things they're looking at, because this is the kind of thing that someone will execute on their own, or execute even with the help of a financial advisor who's not knowledgeable about these issues and items and isn't part of this Slott group and doesn't have the education and proficiency. And it could go unnoticed for a bit of time, and then suddenly you have to catch up and pay fines and penalties, and it could be problematic. So the IRS was trying to close a loophole that spouse beneficiaries could use in very limited situations to avoid RMDs. So I'm here. Here's some background. Let me just pull it up here. Here's some background. When a surviving spouse inherits an IRA, that spouse can remain a beneficiary or do a spousal rollover, or roll over to his or her own IRA. There's another IRS rule that applies when a surviving spouse who remains a beneficiary inherits from an IRA owner who dies, who remains a beneficiary inheriting from an IRA owner who dies before his RMD, that's required beginning date. That's April 1st of the year following the age 73 years old. In that case, the spouse beneficiary can elect to stretch the RMD over his or her single life expectancy, or use the 10-year payout rule with no annual RMDs. This election is available to other eligible designated beneficiaries as well, and we're going to talk about what they are, who are eligible designated beneficiaries, in a second. So let's assume we have a surviving spouse, Ava, who inherits an IRA at age 70 in 2023 from her deceased husband, Manuel, who died at age 72. Ava decides to remain beneficiary and elects the 10-year rule. Since Manuel died before his RMD required beginning date, the 10-year rule would normally allow Ava to defer any RMDs until 12/31/2033. That's the end of the 10-year period. So I'm scrolling up here. Ava thinks she can game the system. She wants to be cute about this. She could use the 10-year rule with no annual RMDs for 8 or 9 years and then do a spousal rollover. That way she could avoid annual RMDs that she would have been required to take from her own IRA starting at age 73. Unfortunately for Ava, some smart IRS employee already thought of this and came up with a hypothetical RMD rule to stymie this scheme. Ava can still do a spousal rollover, but she must first calculate the RMD she would have taken for each year she was age 73 or older. Like any RMDs, these hypothetical RMDs are not eligible for a rollover. So she must first take those RMDs before she could roll over the remaining part of the inherited IRA and a spousal rollover to her own IRA. And add this to the list of too good to be true tax avoidance ideas foiled by the IRS. So I thought that was a really interesting little corner of the tax code to share with you. If you have a strategy that you think nobody's ever heard of, or you read it somewhere on the internet, or saw it on a YouTube channel that you have questions about, you can reach out to us at questions@attleboroughwealth.com. That's questions@attleboroughwealth.com, and we will do our best to order those. So let's talk about the eligible designated beneficiaries. I keep these at the bottom of these notes all the time to remind myself and to help remind you. So who is an eligible designated beneficiaries? Well, there are 5 classes, and they include surviving spouses, minor children of the account owner, disabled individuals. So that follows the strict definition of disability set by the Social Security Administration. The chronically ill and beneficiaries not more than 10 years younger than the IRA owner. So only those folks can still elect the lifetime stretch IRA. All righty. And again, my goal with sharing these topics with you is awareness, right? Bring these things to mind, and also to stress to you that the tax code is complex. IRA distribution strategies are complex. There can be snags in a lot of different places along the way, especially when you lose somebody in your life. And if you lose a spouse, you lose somebody close to you, and you're inheriting, whether it's parents, whether it's a spouse, some other person close to you, it's good to first do nothing. Consult with a qualified individual who can help guide you with these things, who know and have access to these analysts and have at least know where to question things. I will tell you, I don't know every corner of the tax code, but what we're really good at is identifying potential issues and getting the answer to those potential issues. There's a lot we know about tax planning, but I don't think anybody can tell you they know everything. But we certainly have the resources that can get most questions answered. So let's talk about the markets. So what happened in the markets last week? Well, the Dow Jones Industrial Average was up 1.61%. The S&P 500 was up 0.89%. But year to date, the S&P 500 is crushing the Dow Jones Industrial Average. So the S&P 500 is up 18.61% year to date as of the close of business on Friday, July 12th. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is up just 7.22. Folks, 7.22 so far year to date on July 12th is really great too. The NASDAQ is up 23% year to date as of the close of business on July 12th. Last week it was up just 0.24%. All around the globe, we saw upticks 2.34, 1.83, 2.29, 1.37, 3.66, and just about every indice except the small cap index, global small cap index, and the Dow Jones Industrial Average is up double digits. Even the bond index is now in positive territory. It was up 0.82% last week, and that brings us to 0.82% for the year. And that is the U.S. Aggregate Bond Index, the 7 to 9 year maturities, and that's where most people have their bond holdings. The 1 to 3 year bond index was up 0.37% and is positive 2.10% for the year. The Fed funds target is still 5.5%. At year end, it was 5.5%. And 1 year ago, it was 5.25%. We're going to talk a little bit about the direction of the Fed funds target rate later, but that is a snapshot of the market. Let's talk about our what's coming up this week and what we saw last week. So last week we saw the Consumer Price Index report come out. So the Consumer Price Index measures changes in price at the consumer level across a wide range of products and services. So at the consumer level, obviously that's why it's called the Consumer Inflation Price Index. And there are varying CPIs. There's varying CPIs for different regions, for different categories, but we're talking about the broad CPI. So what happened with that CPI report last week is it fell 0.1% month over month, while prices rose at a pace that matched the slowest level in 3 years by moving up 3% year over year. So we're still seeing increase, 3% year over year. It's just slowing, right? And that's what one of the things that the Fed wants to see. Core prices, which exclude food and energy prices, rose 0.1% month over month and 3.4% year over year. So if you take out food and energy, the increase was more, 3.4% year over year, which is the slowest rate of increase since 2021. That's good news. It's surprising too. I would have thought that food and energy prices would have spiked up more, but so that's showing that we're seeing more of a balance there. The analyst writes another inflation report showing that the Fed rate hikes appear to be working. It will likely take another month or two of similar data to convince the Fed inflation is on a sustainable downward path, leaving September as the meeting for the first potential cut. We also had that producer price index. So how is that different? The producer price index, or the PPI, measures changes in prices at the wholesale level across a wide range of products and services. Wholesale prices are important due to the fact that changes in those prices often filter through to the consumer. So wholesale inflation rose 0.2% month over month, higher than the 0.1% expected, while year-over-year prices rose 2.6%. Core PPI, producer price index, which excludes food and energy, rose 0.4%, twice the expected 0.2% year-over-year prices. So remember, excluding food and energy and CPI dropped. Core PPI, which also excludes food and energy, rose. So we've got some conflicting data here. And then previous months were also revised slightly higher. So a report like this could cause the Fed to wait before cutting interest rate. So that's, we're seeing, and frankly, the PPI report is watched more closely than the CPI report by the Fed. So we'll see. I still think that there's a good opportunity for a rate cut. And I know if you just jumped on this and you heard me a month ago, you'd say, well, wait a minute, that's not what you said 30 days ago, but that's okay because even the Vegas odds have changed. I really don't think there's Vegas odds for interest rate cuts. There might be, but even the odds have changed. So we're up, I think we're up at 85 or 90% now. Maybe Jerry can tell me what the odds of a rate cut in September are now. This week, today, we have industrial production. Manufacturing has been holding a neutral pattern, and this report will give investors a further gauge on how the sector is developing. So industrial production and report comes out today. Tomorrow is leading indicators that we'll see if the economy is continuing to slow. And we want we want to see some slowing in the economy to give the Fed the direction they need to start cutting interest rates. Okay, so this is the Financial Focus segment of our weekly webinar. If you're just joining us in this segment, hit the like, subscribe, and notification buttons. But we're going to talk about what you should be doing 2 years from retirement, regardless of what that age is for you. But specifically, there may be things if you're 60 and you're 2 years out, or you're 63 and 2 years out, there might be some things specifically for you to do, and I'm going to touch on that. But there are some things you should focus on 2 years out from retirement. So I'm going to share my whiteboard. I'm going to pull up the whiteboard that I've been using over the past couple weeks, and we've added to this because one of the first things I want you to do, if you haven't watched the previous videos, 55 years old, what you should be doing now. 5 years from retirement, what you should be doing now. Go back and watch those. If you can finish watching this one too, that's fine. But if you haven't watched those, go back and watch them. I'm going to do a quick recap of some of those items because the things I focus on today are the focus items at 2 years out. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't worry about the other things that we talked about, but watch those previous videos. You want to, of course, pay attention to details. You want to pay attention to your expenses. You want to pay attention to your investments, your contributions to your retirement accounts, your taxable accounts. If you have a cash value of life insurance, those contributions, your 401ks. If you have a Roth 401k at work, get an answer about that. Many people still don't know if they have this opportunity to invest in a Roth 401k at work and if it makes sense for them. Depending on your income, it may make sense. It may not make sense, but that's a decision decision point for you with this planning. So contributions should be automated also. So pay attention to these things. There's those tax categories. Where do your investments lie in these tax categories? Remember, you've got your taxable bucket, your tax deferred bucket, your tax advantage bucket. And what sits in these tax advantage buckets are Roth IRAs, Roth 401ks, and some properly structured cash value life insurance policies, or what my friend David McKnight calls life insurance retirement plans. So you've got to know where your funds sit in these tax categories: taxable, tax deferred, tax advantage. If they're in the wrong buckets, it could cost you millions of dollars over your lifetime or years of enjoyment of your retirement funds. So make sure that you understand that. I'm going through these quickly, but these are covered in more details in prior videos. Make sure your team is together. Your certified financial planner, your CPA, your attorney. Make sure this team is together and make sure this team is working together for you. If you don't already have this put together at 2 years out, now is the time. Now is the time to start getting these people together for you. Develop your financial plan. Again, if you haven't done this already, boy, you got to do it now. It's time to sit down with a planner you trust, a competent, educated, proficient planner who's going to do a full financial plan for you and get that financial plan done. Truly comprehensive plan, and review that annually. Get that financial plan together. And again, I talk about the details in previous videos. So here's what we talked about 5 years from retirement from the last video. If you're 60, start looking at Social Security options. That is maximizing your benefits. Do I collect at 62, 67, 60, 70 years old, or somewhere in between? Take a look at your cash flow, your expenses, how much money you have coming in, how much money you have going out, how much money you can set aside, how much money you're going to need in retirement for your living expenses, for your aspirational expenses, for things that you're going to need to do. That's 5 years out. Do Roth conversions make sense for you? Should you be moving things from this bucket to this bucket via Roth conversion? I'm going to talk a lot on a podcast I'm doing with David McKnight today about Roth conversions, and I call them a gift from the IRS because Roth conversions there's no speed limits on Roth conversions. You can convert as much or as little as you'd like. All you have to worry about is the tax on that conversion, and that's a big thing, right? Paying a tax now is a big expense, and it's something to be considered and properly calculated, but this may be something that you want to consider. And 5 years out, is much better than doing it the day you retire or 5 years after you retire. So again, 5 years from retirement focus, we talked about last week, looking at Social Security, maximizing those benefits, looking at your cash flow, paying attention to tax and your tax category. Do Roth conversions make sense? Learn about this. Aunt Irma you have, because you might be in a position where you're paying more for your Medicare benefits than you may realize. And I started introducing at the last video the account segmentation strategy, and we're going to talk a bit more about this today. I'm not going to go over every detail. This is the strategy in a nutshell. It is, instead of having one big portfolio that's designed to fund 35, 40 years of your retirement life, you break it down into smaller portfolios that are designed to fund different segments of time in your lifetime. These 0 to 3, 4 to 6, 7 to 9, 10 to 13, they're years. So you have to figure out how much money you need for each one of those segments, and then you invest your money appropriately, more conservative in these early segments, more aggressive in these later segments when you can afford to have that volatility. So we're going to come back to that, but start paying attention to these investment strategies like account segmentations. And folks, if you have questions about this, I know this gets really complex, as does the Roth conversion and tax efficient planning strategies, but you can reach out to us at questions@attleborowealth.com. That's questions@attleborowealth.com. And if you want to schedule a 15-minute consultation call with me, you can do so at the link in the description here. All right, now we're going to talk about 2 years retirement focus. So here's where we are today. So depending on your age, start planning your Social Security claiming strategies. So if you're 55 and you're 2 years from retirement, this isn't your time for that. But if you're 60, start having this conversation. So depending on age, start planning your Social Security claiming strategies. This is an area where you can get down a terrible rabbit hole on YouTube. There are, one of the videos I did about 6 months ago was with this fellow Sarasota Tim, who said, I collected at 62 and you should too. Well, that's horrible advice. It may be great for him, but first of all, his math is wrong with many parts of his videos, but even if it's 100% right for him, it doesn't mean it's right for you. Social Security is very complex. You have a very limited window to be able to fix any mistakes when it comes to Social Security claiming strategies. And it really, the wrong claiming strategy could affect you negatively for the rest of your life. So it's really important. It's so important that we hired an expert on our team. You've all heard about Heather Schreiber. Heather Schreiber is one of the top Social Security analysts in the country, and she works closely with our team and reviews every one of our clients' Social Security claiming strategies. But if you're 2 years from retirement, unless you're very young, you want to start having this discussion about Social Security claiming strategies. So depending on age, also consider healthcare costs. So you might be 63 years old, for example. You're 2 years out from your retirement, and it lines up nicely with being 65 and being able to collect your Medicare benefits. There are things, of course, you have to pay attention to that, and that is, back to that Aunt Irma that you have. So IRMA is income-related monthly adjustment amount. It's the additional surcharge that you may have to pay if you make what the government deems too much money. And this can be hundreds of dollars a month. So if you don't know what I'm talking about when we're talking about IRMA strategies, I just happen to have a video about IRMA. We'll put the link in the description of this video. But depending on your age, consider those healthcare costs, because if you're way before or any time before your Medicare claiming age, you've got to consider the cost of premiums. So it could be $1,500. It could be $1,200. It could be more depending on your health and your needs, and the number of people that you have to cover. You could be retiring and you have your spouse on your policy, and now that person has to get coverage as well. That could be significantly more money than you may be considering. So if you're retiring prior to Medicare collection age 65 typically for most people, then consider the cost of the premiums you may have for healthcare costs. Zero in on your goals, needs, and objectives. Very few people really have this conversation. Even folks who have their detailed spreadsheets of their expenses, that's great. Very few people really have the conversation, well, geez, I'd like to travel, and this is what it's going to cost. There are other things I'd like to do. I want to buy that RV, drive around the country, whatever your goals and objectives are. Remember, we have living expenses, and then we have aspirational expenses. You've got to really start zeroing in on these goals, needs, and objectives and get clear about your expenses now, 2 years out. Because if you wait till you're much closer, and it gets more difficult to make adjustments as you get closer. Not that you can't do it, but it gets more difficult. If you wait until you're just ready to retire, you might end up delaying your retirement or not having the type of retirement that you may want, certainly early on in your retirement life. So zero in on those goals, needs, and objectives. And again, there are things that you just might not be considering. Taxes on Social Security. Do you know that your Social Security can be subject to tax? Up to 85% of your benefit can be subject to tax. That could affect your lifestyle. If you're expecting $3,000 a month and suddenly it's $3,000 a month less tax, well, then you may have to either adjust your spending or come up with a different strategy. And there are strategies to help lessen or avoid that, but you can't do it at the last minute, or it's harder at the last minute. So zero in on those goals, needs, and objectives. Get clear about your expenses. Again, living expenses. So this is the time. If you don't have a program, reach out to us again at questions at attleborowealth.com. That's questions at attleborowealth.com. We have a spreadsheet we've put together that helps identify expenses. There are categories in that spreadsheet that you may not be considering. I'm happy to share it with you. Just send us an email. But you want to get a handle on those living expenses. So these living expenses are things that you're going to need to just get by, right? Your food, your housing, your internet bill. I know that's a standard expense. Probably your cell phone, things that you need to get through your life. It isn't always the travel and the other things that you want to do. First, get a handle on those basic living expenses. Make sense? Then you have those aspirational expenses. Here's where you layer in, well, geez, I'd like to spend $10,000 a year traveling in my first several years of retirement. Identify what that is. Don't worry about the inflation number, because if you're working with a qualified financial planner, they should be able to push out those inflation numbers or calculate those inflation numbers for you, because we know that the cost of a $10,000 vacation today is going to be much different in 5 years or 10 years. The cost of just basic goods or services are going to be more expensive in the future, but that can become overwhelming for people. Well, geez, I know it's going to cost me $10,000 a month today or $5,000 a month today, but what's that going to look like in the future? So don't let that stymie you. This is why I say this, because you can really get stuck in trying to figure out those future needs. It's not that they shouldn't be calculated, but there's decent programs out there, I'm sure, that can also calculate these things for you. And if you're good with spreadsheets, you could put a simple increase in your expenses, whether they're living expenses, aspirational expenses. But identify at least what they are today and really zero in on that. But don't forget the other things. So here are things that people forget. They'll say, okay, this is what I need. I'm just going to give you a number, $5,000 a month. They're my basic living expenses. Now I'd also like to spend $10,000 a year during retirement on travel for probably the first 5 years. And as we dig in, we say, okay, well, how old's your car? Do you think that you're going to need to replace your car during your retirement lifetime? Well, sure. My car is about 5 years old. I keep my cars for a long period of time, and this one's about 5 years old, so I'll probably have it another 5 years, but then I'm going to need a new one. Well, folks, I don't know if you bought a car recently, but it's really hard to buy a car under $35,000, $40,000, and that's kind of a basic car. So you can easily get up to $50,000 for a decent car. So you've got to add that in, and then. Okay, well, tell me about where you're living. Well, geez, the house we're living in, we may need a new roof, and we may need a new heating system, and my spouse would really like to redo the kitchen, and if we sell it, there are definitely things that we're going to have to do. So all those things, also think about that. So now you have a new car, or at least one new car. If there's a spouse involved, there might be 2 new cars. You've got maybe $100,000 or more, several $100,000 in renovations that you might want to do or need to do to your home before you move on. And then there's also this potential downsizing or resizing or just trading in one house for another. And that can be very complex and very impactful to a plan, either very positively or very negatively. But these things all have to be fleshed out. Folks, 2 years out is a really good time to be having these discussions because it allows you to plan for things that you want to do and things that you need to do. 5 years out is good too. 2 years out is really the time to sharpen it. Now, on our next webinar, we're going to talk about 1 year out. That's even a deeper sharpen. But 2 years is a really good timeline to really sharpen those goals, needs, and objectives, and expenses and things that you just might not be considering. So living expenses, aspirational expenses, taxes. Not enough people are talking about taxes, the cost of taxes. When you talk about $10,000 a month, $5,000 a month, that what we need to spend, whatever your number is, that's an after-tax number. Few people say, well, geez, I want to spend $12,250 because I know that a month because I know I've got to allow for a tax payment. I can't think of a person who's actually come to me with that without calculation. This is what I need to spend. That's the net number after tax. And depending on where you live, you have state tax and you have federal tax. And we all know, all of us sitting here know that taxes are likely going to be much higher within the next 6 or 7 years than they are now. So not only are folks missing the potential cost of tax in retirement, they're also certainly missing the potential cost of rising taxes in retirement. So sharpen your skills on that too. Now, there are some very good resources for that. I'm going to be sharing, or I'm going to be on a guest on a podcast at 1 o'clock today with a fellow named David McKnight. David McKnight wrote a book called The Power of Zero. I'll put a plug in for David McKnight and The Power of Zero. I'm going to write it right here. Power of Zero. The Power of Zero. If you haven't read that book, go to Amazon, order that book, and that will help sharpen your skills when it comes to preparing yourself for paying taxes in retirement. So this 2-year mark is really about focus and sharpening. If you're a client of ours and if you haven't read The Power of Zero and you want a copy of it, reach out to us and we'll send you a copy. All right, so be clear about your expenses. Living expenses, aspirational expenses, and taxes, exclamation point. Both current and future. Focus on segment 1 and 2 of your investment strategy. So back to this segmentation strategy. Now, I know there's a lot going on, and you should go back to the previous video. What should you be doing 5 years out from your retirement? So you can see the discussion about this more. But when I'm talking about segment 1 and segment 2, I'm talking about this area right here. Why is this important? Well, first you have to identify how much money you're going to need in years 0 to 3 of your retirement and years 4 to 6 of your retirement. So you identify the dollar amounts that you're going to need. Let me change my pen color because it might just be clearer for everybody. So 0 to 3 years and 4 to 6 years. All these other years are important as well, and they should be invested appropriately. But certainly, if you're 2 years prior to retirement, tick these out. Minus 1 year, minus 2 years. You want to make sure that you've got your funding together for those first 3 years because you know the risk of if the market drops dramatically and you're pulling funds out in early retirement, that it can be devastating to your retirement. So you want to set yourself up to help avoid that. And one of the ways that you set yourself up to help avoid that is figure out how much money you're going to need in those first 3 years and put it into something very conservative and very safe. Now, fortunately, right now, we have a lot of great options for that segment 1 type of portfolio. It could be CDs, money markets. We're getting good interest rates for now. Once interest rate cuts start to happen, we're going to see those interest rates go down. But you want to zero in on these 0 to 3 and 4 to 6 first two segments, segment 1, segment 2. This portfolio should have very, very little or no risk. These are funds that you're going to need in the first 3 years of your retirement, first 3 to 4 years of your retirement. If the market drops 40%, do you want this money at risk? Well, the answer is no. You don't want that money at risk. This next segment, years 4 to 6 or 5 to 7, depending on your plan, all this information gets, how do we figure out what fits in these boxes? It's driven by the financial plan. Well, the next segment of years 4 to 6 or 5 to 7, if that's for you, that should go into a slightly more aggressive portfolio, but still not overly aggressive, because that's going to fund your next years 4 to 6 or 5 to 7. And we cascade those down. So as you spend this money, 0 to 3, this 4 to 6 takes its place, gets reallocated into a more conservative portfolio, and it all cascades down like that. So I want you to focus on, if you're 2 years from retirement, I really want you to focus on making sure that you at least have that set up. You should, of course, have the rest of it set up, but just from experience, people get sloppy with the segment 1 and segment 2. They say, oh, I know I have to do that, but geez, my portfolio is really doing great right now, and I don't want to rebalance it into the planned segmentation. So you get on that pendulum of fear and greed, and a lot of folks are on that greed side. And when the market comes clapping down, it's going to hit those folks the pendulum is way over here. It's going to hit them the most, and that could dramatically change the trajectory of your retirement. So I want you to focus on, certainly have that whole segmentation strategy planned out, but I want you to zero in on and focus on at least segment 1 and segment 2. Going back. Focus on segment 1 and segment 2 of your investment strategy. Ensure your beneficiaries. No, that's beneficiaries. There's no spell check on this program, so my apologies there. But ensure your beneficiaries are correct and up to date. Review your financial plan, your cash flow, your goals, needs, and objectives, your potential issues, tax planning. In that financial plan, are Roth conversions right for you? Life insurance, is that right for you? That tax advantage funding of a properly structured life insurance policy. Sometimes there's long-term care benefits and, of course, a life insurance benefit. So is that right for you? Should that be part of your plan? Much easier early on in this 2-year window. If you're prior to age 60, do you think it's easier if life insurance for you to get life insurance than after age 60? Yeah, it's probably easier depending on your health and probably less costly. Long-term care coverage, your investment strategy, your estate plan. You want to tighten up and you want to really pay attention to all these things as you're leading into your retirement. Sure, of course you should have been doing this 10 years ago, and hopefully you did. But if you're just jumping in now, if it's 2 years to retirement and you're just jumping in now, go back, look at the prior videos, focus on these items that I talked about today. Make sure that you go through and you learn all about the other things, the 5-year focus, the putting your retirement team together, paying attention to the details. Do all that too. If you do these things, you're going to have a better opportunity to be prepared for your retirement. It's going to feel much better rolling into your retirement 2 years from now, rather than ending up there. Bang, if retirement is 65 years old, now I'm suddenly 65 years old. So many things get in the way, your job, maybe your kids, caring for your family, maybe even your pets. There's a lot of things that get in the way, and maybe you didn't do the planning that you needed to do. But even if you did, it's time to really focus in and sharpen it. And that 2-year window is a good time for that. All right. So that's our webinar for today. I hope that was all helpful. Again, no webinar next week. The following week, we're going to talk about 1 year from retirement, what you should be doing just 1 year from retirement, and that's exciting. First of all, you should be planning your retirement party. But beyond that, there are other things you should be doing. I hope that was all helpful today. Love to hear some feedback from you. I hope you all have a great week. Take care.